The military-industrial complex. The disastrous rise of misplaced power.
Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here. I'd like for you to read this book, The War State, by Michael Swanson. America's always gone to war a lot, though in older times it would disarm for a bit between each one. But in World War II, the U.S. built a military and intelligence apparatus so large, it ended up reducing the former constitutional government to an almost ceremonial role and converting our economy into an engine of destruction. In The War State, Michael Swanson does a great job telling the sordid history of the rise of this national security state, relying on important first-hand source material, but writing for you and me. Find out how Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy all alternately empowered and fought to control this imperial beast, and how the USA has gotten to where it is today. Corrupt, bankrupt, soaked in blood, despised by the world. The War State by Michael Swanson, available at Amazon.com and at Audible.com. Or just click the logo in the right-hand margin at scotthorton.org.
We should take nothing for granted.
All right, you guys, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. This is my show, The Scott Horton Show. And our first guest today is Cindy Corrie. She's on the phone right now from Israel, where she and her husband, Craig, are appealing to the Israeli Supreme Court over liability from the Israeli army for the death of their daughter, Rachel, in the Gaza Strip in 2003. Welcome back to the show, Cindy. How are you?
I'm doing just fine, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Great. No, it's great to talk to you again. I really appreciate you making time for us, and I know especially it's late there in Israel now. Can you please, well, I guess first of all, tell us about your daughter, and then tell us about what happened, and then we can get into the court case and all this, if that's okay.
Sure. Rachel was our third child. I have a son and an older daughter. She had a brother, Chris, and a sister, Sarah. And, Rachel was like all of our kids. I mean, she was magical and very unique and very creative. She loved art. She loved writing. She considered herself a poet at a very young age. I think people are fairly aware that we feel really blessed that because she was a writer, we have, a lot of her thoughts that we can turn to in that writing. And that's been so helpful over the course of the last 11 years. And I think it's part of the reason that her story has resonated with a lot of people, because they've been able to turn to her directly, not just hear about her from us, but to be able to hear what she was thinking and how she thought about things. She was she had a great sense of humor. I always felt like you knew when Rachel came through the door after she had left, wasn't living at home, was in college and so forth. I always felt when she came through the door, you knew things were going to be interesting after that. And she had a great deal of empathy for everybody in our family as well as for other folks. So, and we were a pretty, we talked a lot in our family, and sometimes we disagreed a lot about different things. And I remember one of the things, I'll just end with this, but she was, if she felt like, others were kind of ganging up on me, her brother, her sister, and Craig, I would just find her sitting next to me, and her arm would slip around me as kind of just a little gesture of, I'm quietly with you, Mom, kind of thing. But she could do that for any one of us. And her spirit is very much with us and guides a lot of what we do. And we've all continued to learn from her, but we miss her a lot.
How did she end up in the Gaza Strip in the spring of 2003?
Rachel, after 9/11, really started looking for explanations for why that happened. And that led her to Israel-Palestine as one of the causes, or at least one wound that was impacting how people in the region and in the world, felt about the U.S., certainly felt about Israel. And she was in college at the time. She was in a class at the Evergreen State College where they do integrated kinds of classes. So they have sometimes 2-3 professors teaching a course around a theme, but bringing different academic areas, to that theme for discussion. And the class that she was in at the time was called Local Knowledge, and her professors talk about how this is the first time that class had been taught, and the goal was to look beneath the surface in our own region, in our own area, to see what hidden histories were there. And Anne Fischel and Nelson, her Evergreen faculty, talk about how Rachel took that, they think, to kind of a different place because of 9/11, and then because of the peace movement evolving more strongly out of that in our community, and just trying to dig very deeply into what was happening in the larger world and in the Middle East at the time. She had friends who in 2002 traveled to Israel and Palestine in response to a call from the newly formed International Solidarity Movement to have internationals come to be in solidarity with Palestinians who wanted to nonviolently resist, the very always painful occupation, but at that time particularly, I think, painful occupation and how it was impacting people. It was a very difficult, harsh, violent time here for everyone. But certainly people in the Gaza Strip, people in the West Bank were suffering, and many people were being killed. In Gaza, there were these huge home demolitions happening. So ISM was formed. Some of Rachel's friends went. She followed them, followed what they were doing very closely and what they had to say about it, and then made a decision that she would like to go herself. And one of her friends told her that the Gaza Strip was where the need was greatest. That's where people were most isolated and really hurting from what was going on there. And she studied Arabic. She was taking Arabic. She was very good at it. Her professor later said she was my best student, and he, had hoped that she would, stay home for a while and really work harder on that Arabic, because he said if you just go a little bit longer, you'll become fluent when you get there because you've got such an ear for it. But she was determined to go at the time that the Iraq War was starting. And if you remember, we started bombing Iraq a couple days after Rachel was killed. And there was a feeling that the situation in Israel and Palestine would worsen if the world was focused, if we were focused on Iraq. And I think it happened differently than what people maybe anticipated, but I think it certainly did happen. So she made that decision. She planned carefully. Our family was not connected to this region at all, and part of what she did in preparation was to try to educate us, to help bring our understanding to a better level before she actually went there. She gave me a book, Mothers and Daughters. I think it's the title, but it's about Palestinian mothers in the West Bank and daughters, their relationships in the West Bank and inside Israel. And she checked out films. I wasn't living in Olympia at the time, but when I would come home, she would check out films from the Evergreen State College library that we would watch together. She certainly before she left, connected me to different websites where she thought I could get helpful information. So she was really preparing us. I think she really did not want us to be too worried about her. This was something really important for her to do on a personal level, and she wanted to bring us along, and she did. So it was January of 2003 that she flew to Ben Gurion Airport. she quickly made her way to Beit Sahur in the West Bank for training with the ISM and went pretty much directly after that to Gaza.
I guess, first of all, for people who aren't familiar, she was killed by an Israeli army bulldozer that was bulldozing a house. And this is something that, and I admit I'm not the most familiar with this story out of everybody, but I've never heard this anywhere except from you guys, Cindy and your husband Craig, that she was protecting a house full of children at the time that she was killed. This was not, I remember it was spun at the time like, she wanted to be a martyr so bad she went and got herself killed by this bulldozer or something. But in fact, what she was doing was she was flinging herself basically between a bulldozer and a house full of young children. Is that right?
Well, it's interesting that you say this because I did an interview just a day or so ago with a radio station here in Israel, and they had someone from the NGO Monitor on at the same time, and he was talking about all that ISM was about was protecting terrorists, And so I told the story about the family in the house because, yes, Rachel, the house that she stood in front of that day was one where she had stayed with the family. She had slept on the floor with the children because the house was in the border area near the Egyptian border, but very much back from it. But between Gaza and Egypt, I think people have to remember this was not between Gaza and Israel. This is between Gaza and Egypt. And the Israeli military had control of a very narrow corridor called the Philadelphia Corridor that they had by treaty. But they were expanding it, taking control of a larger area for various reasons.
And I'm sorry, we have to take this break. So just for clarity, real quick, there were, in fact, children in the house, and we'll pick up the narrative on the other side of the break here. Is that correct?
There were.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, that's very correct.
Okay. It's Cindy Corrie, mother of Rachel Corrie, killed by the Israeli IDF back in 2003, and they're appealing in the Israeli Supreme Court, and we'll be right back after this. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for WallStreetWindow.com. Mike Swanson knows his stuff. He made a killing running his own hedge fund and always gets out of the stock market before the government-generated bubbles pop, which is, by the way, what he's doing right now, selling all his stocks and betting on gold and commodities. Sign up at WallStreetWindow.com and get real-time updates from Mike on all his market moves. It's hard to know how to protect your savings and earn a good return in an economy like this. Mike Swanson can help. Follow along on paper and see for yourself. WallStreetWindow.com. All right, you guys, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. This is my show, The Scott Horton Show. And I'm on the phone with Cindy Corrie, mother of Rachel Corrie, who was killed by the IDF in the Gaza Strip back in 2003, as she mentioned, just 2 days before the war. And so I'll go ahead, and I'm sorry we had to stop for the break there. I'll let you go ahead and talk more about that day, whatever it was that you wanted to say about it. But I'll go ahead and add my question, too, which is whether you think that, well, for example, that 2-day difference between the start of the Iraq War and her killing that you mentioned there, whether that to you indicates that perhaps this was premeditated, that they took advantage of the fact that everyone in America was completely distracted with the impending invasion of Iraq in order to do it, which I believe I've heard Ray McGovern imply that he believes that, not necessarily that he was claiming to know that, but that's how it seemed to him, as though it may have been a premeditated act. And then secondarily to that, if not, perhaps, do you think it was a deliberate act, or is it possible that it really was just a mistake by an armored bulldozer driver who just didn't see your daughter? Which that's, deliberate is still a different question than premeditation. So now I'll turn the floor back over to you. Thank you.
Well, that's a lot to talk about. And I just want to say that there were massive home demolitions happening on that border. Sometimes you'll read that the Israelis were taking down an isolated house here or there, but there it was really blocks of houses to widen this Philadelphia corridor. So Rachel was staying in the homes of houses that had suddenly found themselves at the edge of this because the ones in front of them had been just demolished. do I have not seen. I mean, I am not somebody who kind of goes to the theorizing about, you know, some sort of some intention to do this around the Iraq War. I haven't seen evidence of that. I do know, you know, because the deputy battalion commander who testified in court dictated into the operations log after Rachel was killed that he knew that this was going to be bad in the media, but that they could not set a precedent of, you know, stopping their work for the foreigners. And so there was an intention, I think, to figure out what to do about the internationals that had come there to try to nonviolently resist these massive home demolitions, which under international law are illegal, according to the Fourth Geneva Convention, unless there is absolute military necessity. And organizations like Human Rights Watch, they had a report in 2004 called Raising Rafah. Rafah was the community where Rachel was in Gaza. And they said that for the most part, all the demolitions that they investigated, it seemed like this whole process was happening without military necessity. You know, certainly it was condemned. Eventually it stopped in that part of Gaza. And of course the Gaza disengagement happened. At that point, there were about 8,000 settlers, or in 2005, about 8,000 settlers, with 25,000 Israeli soldiers needed to keep them there, taking up to, I've seen figures up to about 40% of the land of Gaza, which was Palestinian land. So, you know, it was just an untenable, really unforgivable situation all the way around. I think in terms of what happened to Rachel that day, she was killed when, at the end of the day, around 5 o'clock, the bulldozers had gone back to the border area. The activists thought that they had prevented a demolition that afternoon. They were very close to Dr. Samir's house, and then one of the bulldozers came forward again, and Rachel took a stand. She knelt, her arms were in the air, as the to show that she wasn't going to move. As the bulldozer kept coming forward, she climbed up onto the pile of earth that it was pushing ahead of it, and her friends, 7 international eyewitnesses who were from Israel, or from the UK and the US, stated that they believed that she was visible, that when she started climbing up, that her head got to the point where she could look into the cab, but then the bulldozer kept coming forward, and she stumbled backwards, fell backwards. The bulldozer continued over her. They were screaming and hollering for it to stop. It stopped for a moment, and then it backed over her again, and she, her friends, you know, ran to her at that point. Many people have seen the photos that they took at that time. And they stayed with her, told her that they loved her. And she said, "I think my back is broken." And those were her final words. And there were 2 people in the bulldozer, a driver and a commander. The commander was placed there to be a second set of eyes. There's a manual that was actually, because of an action by the Israeli Supreme Court, parts of it were released, and we were able to see that this manual was written at the beginning of the Second Intifada to try to advise or to state what the rules were for operating this heavy machinery in limited conflict. And the manual states that there should be no people on if there should be no movement if there were people within 5 meters on the sides of the bulldozer or within 20 meters in front of it. And all that afternoon, these bulldozers were coming up much closer to the activists than those limits. Now, in court, the Israelis say that manual was only meant for training purposes. It wasn't meant for actual times when they were out in the field working, which, just seems not very reasonable from our point of view, but that's what the state was arguing. But after listening to testimony as well of those soldiers, there were the two in the bulldozer. I wasn't able to see them. None of our family and none of the people in the courtroom except our attorneys and the judge were able to see those soldiers because there was a security certificate signed by Ehud Barak to protect their identities. And even though our attorneys tried to get the state's attorneys to agree to let us be able to observe just the three of our family members, the state's attorneys refused to allow that. So we did not see them testify, but we heard them. And they spoke in Hebrew, of course, and it was translated for us by very helpful Israelis who made sure that we understood what was going on. I did not, we did not hear remorse. I feel like we didn't get a full picture because we weren't able to see their faces or their body language as we heard this testimony. There was discrepancy, though, between the two people in the bulldozer, the driver and the commander. The driver said that Rachel's body was, when he first saw it after she had been hit, was exactly where we see it in the picture. The commander, who was supposed to be the second set of eyes, insisted in his testimony under oath that Rachel's body was not between the bulldozer and the mound of earth that the bulldozer had been pushing, but was instead, he said, on the other side of a huge big mound of earth so that he couldn't see her. That's a significant discrepancy between the testimony of those two people who were sitting next to each other in this bulldozer, and yet that was never utilized by the judge or by the state's attorneys, by the investigators. There wasn't an effort that we could see to try to figure out why did you have one person in that bulldozer saying, testifying so dramatically differently about what he saw. And I think it raises a lot of questions. Our family, from the very beginning, has insisted on getting the truth and getting information and learning what happened. And we avoided using the word murder, always. And I still don't use it. But after listening to that testimony, the driver couldn't even remember what time of day Rachel was killed. He didn't know whether he drove that bulldozer over her at noon or in the evening. And that was very stunning to me when I heard it. So given all of that, and given what her friends said, I really believe that at least one person in that bulldozer knew that she was there.
They're certainly being dishonest, it sounds like, about what happened. And I'm sorry, because we're already a little bit over time, but can you tell us very briefly here about the basis for the appeal? And I guess the Supreme Court has now heard the appeal, and you're waiting for them to rule, correct?
That's right. So the district court judge in August of 2012 found completely in favor of the Israeli military in the state of Israel. He said that the military performed faultlessly. The only person that he found negligent of anything was Rachel for being there. And to think that something of this severity could happen and she would be the only person who had any responsibility is pretty stunning. also thought that the investigation that took place was flawless, even though it's not only our family, but the U.S. government has been on record stating that the report they saw of that investigation did not reflect a thorough, credible, transparent investigation. And such an investigation was promised to President Bush by Prime Minister Sharon the day after Rachel was killed. We determined quite quickly, our attorneys felt strongly that we needed to appeal the decision, and we agreed. We feel like he also, the judge said that Rachel was killed as an act of war, and that the way he interpreted the law, Israel had no responsibility then for what happened. And that flies in the face of international law.
And that then is that the basis of the appeal then? I'm sorry, we're so over time, we got to go, but that's the basis of the appeal, is that the law was improperly applied to the case?
It is. Uh-huh. And the Supreme Court now has it. They had written statements from our attorneys and the state's attorneys, and yesterday oral argument. We don't know when there will be a ruling. There's no deadline. Okay. It could be months. It could be longer. It could be years. But we look forward to a verdict. There was a 3-panel group of judges who heard it. They asked important questions, probing questions of both our attorney and the state's attorney. I would say they were very balanced in that. And they asked the right questions. It seemed to suggest that they do know what the issues are here and how important this law is and how it's applied. I think I hope that they can find ways to challenge what the district court did, so that human rights observers, those in media, who work in media, and all civilians will be safer. And I think ultimately that will be much better for the Israeli military as well.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you so much for your time, Cindy. It's great to talk to you again.
Thank you very much.
And I'm sorry, one last question real quick. Rachel Corrie Foundation, that's the website you would have me tell the people to go to, right?
It is. Okay. It's rachelcorriefoundation.org.
Right.
And we have lots of work that we do. We'd love to have people take a look.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. That is Cindy Corrie, Rachel Corrie's mother, and they're appealing in the Israeli Supreme Court. RachelCorrieFoundation.org is the website. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for CashIntoCoins.com. So you want to buy some Bitcoins? CashIntoCoins.com makes it fast, easy, and safe to get Bitcoins. Just deposit the money into their account at any of the major banks they support, and then just email them a picture of the receipt and your Bitcoin address, and you get your Bitcoins. Almost always the same day it clears. In a tough, competitive new market, CashIntoCoins.com has the advantage. A great system and great customer service to keep you coming back. That's CashIntoCoins.com. Just click the link in the right margin at ScottHorton.org. Hey, y'all, Scott here. Ever wanted to help support the show and own silver at the same time? Well, a friend of mine, libertarian activist Arlo Pignatti, has invented the alternative currency with the most promise of them all. QR Silver Commodity Discs. The first ever QR code 1-ounce silver pieces. Just scan the back of one with your phone and get the instant spot price. They're perfect for saving or spending at the market. And anyone who donates $100 or more to the Scott Horton Show at scotthorton.org/donate gets one. That's scotthorton.org/donate. And if you'd like to learn and order more, send them a message at commoditydiscs.com or check them out on Facebook at /commoditydiscs. And thanks. Hey, all, Scott Horton here to tell you about this great new project, Listen and Think Audio at listenandthink.com. They've got 2 new audiobooks read by the deepest voice in libertarianism, the great historian Jeff Riggenbach. Our Last Hope, Rediscovering the Lost Path to Liberty by Michael Maharrey of the 10th Amendment Center is available now. And Beyond Democracy, co-authored by Frank Karsten of the Mises Institute Netherlands and journalist Carl Beckman, will be released this month. And they're only just getting started. So check out listenandthink.com. You may be able to get your first audiobook absolutely free. That's Listen and Think Audio at listenandthink.com. Oh, John Kerry's Mideast Peace Talks have gone nowhere. Hey, all, Scott Horton here for the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org. U.S. military and financial support for Israel's permanent occupations of the West Bank and Gaza Strip is immoral, and it threatens national security by helping generate terrorist attacks against our country. And face it, it's bad for Israel, too. Without our unlimited support, they would have much more incentive to reach a lasting peace with their neighbors. It's past time for us to make our government stop making matters worse. Help support CNI at councilforthenationalinterest.org.